Hey, Eddie printer friends. Let's work through taking a single image and breaking it into a platter of hexagon-shaped cookies. Let's go over the supplies I will be using for this tutorial. I will be using the Inkscape application for clipping the image into hexagon shapes. After a bit of research, I found the latest beta version was the one to go with. So far, I found it to be both very stable for both the Mac and Windows environment. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention the software is free and cross-platform. I'll put the link in the description below. I based the hexagon shape after the 3-inch hexagon cutter from Bobby's Cookie Cutters. I'll put the link below. You can of course use this idea and explore other shapes. They just need to fit together like a puzzle. I modified the image from Kelly in the Eddie Facebook group. She's the person that inspired this video in the first place. I like to use Swift Publisher to plan, place, and print images with Eddie. If you're following along with Windows, you could use Bartender at this step. I also print manually using a Milton base tray. I've had my Eddie for more than a year now, and this is the accessory I use the most. I have my own 3D printer, so I was able to modify it a bit and have magnets in each corner. This lets me use a frame to hold down a piece of paper towel so that I can print an outline of the cookie first and then know exactly where my cookie goes to print. Just a reminder, I am using the Inkscape beta, which is 1.4. It's been really stable for me, and some of the things that we're doing rely on new tools in the beta. When you open Inkscape, you probably will be given just this interface, which either asks you to open a recent file or start with one of the already preset items in print, etc. Quick setup allows you to go in and change your appearance. Default keyboard, this is really nice if you're used to working with some other application that is used for vector drawing. So if you're very familiar with CorelDRAW or Adobe Illustrator, you can use that. I am not familiar with those, so I'm just going to go with the default, and I chose the colorful appearance because it makes me happy. All right, now back to time to draw, and we're just going to start with a brand new document. When this opens up, we have, it looks like a 4.5 by 4.5 document. I have a feeling that's because the last thing I worked on was a design that would fit on my Milton tray. So we want to go in and change this to a document size that reflects the end result that we want with our platter of hexagons. So to do that, to make those changes, I'm coming over here to this right-hand side, and I am going to come down this command bar. This stays pretty static, but what we're looking for are document settings, and that's not apparent here, so we have to come use the arrow key, and we're looking for this icon, which is the document with the wrench. This document properties opens up and allows us to make a change to the document size. I am going to change this to 13 inches wide by 11 inches tall. I think that gives me plenty of room to work with my artwork and lots of hexagon cookies. The other thing that I'm going to do while I'm in document properties, it looks like my guides are turned on. I'm going to turn those off for what I'm doing in Inkscape today. So I'm just going to go to the guides tab and uncheck show guides. That's all we're going to do here in the document properties. So I'm going to close this, and we're ready to begin creating. To get going with this, we are going to come over here to the left-hand side and look at all of the tools in our toolbox. This is where you see my colorful icons showing up. And I'm coming over to the toolbox and I'm looking for this polygon tool. And when I select the polygon tool, this top bar changes. And that tool controls bar is going to change depending on what we choose over here on this left-hand side. By default, it shows me 6 corners, which is what I want. And we are able to come to our document, our page area, and just draw in our hexagon shape. As I draw, you can see you can turn it using that star cursor. And what I'm going to try to do is align this so that I know that the bottom area is parallel on the horizon. So I'm going to now that I've got my shape laid out, and I'm not worried about the size right now, we'll change that in a minute. I'm really more worried about, is this level? So I'm going to choose the selector tool, and notice that when I want to come back to the selector tool, all I have to do is press S on the keyboard. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to place this as close as I can to one of those solid lines. This looks really good. I think I nailed it. So if you need to go back in and work with yours, you can simply double click on your hexagon and you get that node here that allows you to rotate it. All right, back to the selector tool by pressing S or tapping on the S. And now let's work on the size. Now I am going to deselect this tool, and what this allows me to do is change the height separately from the width. And I measured Bobby's cutter, and it is exactly 3 inches wide, and the height is a little bit shorter. It is 2.6 inches wide. All right, this is exactly what we want. I'll just lock that now, and we have our hexagon shape. If I want to change the size of this for any reason, or change the color, I should say, for any reason, I can just come down here to the fill and stroke colors. I'm going to change this to a blue. Oops, I have to select it first. To change it to blue. And I think I want to change the opacity. And this just allows me to see through it. And this is helpful when we're looking at our artwork. And so to do that, there is a box that I want to pop up right here. So to get that to pop up, I'm going to go to this little downturned arrow where we went for the document properties. This time I'm going to look for this icon, which is fill and stroke. And now we have this docking area where most of our tool set will hang out in here. And with this selected, I can come down to the bottom and change the opacity. All right, so we've got our shape selected, and let's say that we want to use this later as a placement tool for Swift Publisher, and we want a placement to know where to place our cookie when we're ready to print. So I'm going to export this. Now that we have this docking area open, I can come here and see the rest of my tools, and I'm going to choose export. I'm going to export a single file, and because it's selected, that's all I want. I only want what I have selected, nothing else. So I'm going to choose selection, and you can see that it shows it down here. I can also show where I want this to be saved, and I want to save this to my desktop. I want a PNG, and I click save. All right. Now we've saved that for later, and now it's time for us to build our puzzle. We need to replicate this hexagon to fill up our page, and we're going to use another tool for this. So back over to our docking area, back to that downturned arrow, and we're going to choose Path Effects. So we're going to choose Path Effects, from this next window, we're going to choose which of those generate tools. So we've got edit tools and distort. We are going to generate more hexagons with the tiling tool. So it gives us a little bit of a start here. It sort of works for us, but we need to make some modifications. And this is the most tedious part, I promise you. Over here in our docking area, let's look at rows and columns. For right now, I don't want to work with all of these hexes. I just want a few. So I think that's the perfect number. I've got a row, I've got a couple of columns. This is exactly what I need. The rest of the maneuvering is going to be done with the gap X, gap Y, and offset. We're going to come over to our page area, and we're going to double click on that upper left-hand corner, and we've got some node tools to use. Now these are great because I can do big movements that I can fine-tune later with our gap X, gap Y, and offset. So I need to make some room. When I move these over to make it look like a puzzle, this piece has to fit up in between these. You'll see what I mean as we work. So I'm going to pull this over and do a little bit of a guesstimate on what it would take for this part to fit up here. I think I moved it a little too much, but we can fine tune it as we work. See, I almost have a negative here of that hexagon. Now what we need to do is offset or move this whole row over. So we're coming over to the offset tool and we're going to move it. Great. Now we're going to move this up into this space, and I'm coming over to this node and going to make that big movement. It's pretty close, but we don't want them to touch. So let me zoom in a little bit so we can see our work a little bit more clearly. And I can use some adjustments. We've just got to tinker until we get it right. So I'm going to move this over a little bit, and I'm going to move this gap Y moves it up or down, so I'm going to move it to the negative, which seems not correct. We may have to change that once we add more rows. I think that looks pretty good. I can try to move this over just a little bit and reduce the amount of space. We just don't want them to touch. Zoom back out. And now let's build out the rest of the puzzle. Let's add and add some columns. Looks really good. Choose that selector tool, and I want to fill this whole page with blue, just in case our artwork takes up the entire page. So I'm going to add one more row. And now we've got a completely full page. And I can move this around just a little bit. And I think that looks really great. At this point, if we know this is the hexagon we're always going to use, we can start from here as a template. So we're going to save this by going to the File menu and pulling down to Save Template. I'm going to call this Hexagon Puzzle Start. And maybe I put in the description that I use Bobby's Hex 3-inch. So this looks great, and I'm going to save this template. Now I'm going to save the document. So this is just specifically for the cookie work that we're doing for this puzzle with the little baby dragons. So now I'm going to save. So I just did on my keyboard Command S. If you're doing this on Windows, of course it would be Control S. And I'm going to call this Baby Dragon Welcome. And I will save it to the desktop, and that allows me to look for it later and organize it. That's usually my style. I save everything to the desktop and clean up later. And save. So now if anything catastrophic happens, we know we can always come back to this point. A couple of things I didn't completely finish out, we probably should have done that before we saved the template, is I need to make sure that split elements is selected so that when we make our puzzle we have individual pieces. And we also need to come up to the corner of this docking area for tiling and choose flatten. And this puts everything on the same layer. All right. Next steps. Now we need to bring in our artwork. And to do that, I'm going to go to the File menu and choose Import. And I've got a folder on my desktop called Dragon Hex Puzzle. And here is my Baby Dragon PNG that I saved from Canva. I'm going to open that up. And it pops in. And what I'm going to do here, not permanently, but just for the moment, is reduce the opacity of this artwork so that I can see the hexagons in the background. And the reason I want to do this is I want to pay attention to where all my dragons fit. So this dragon is going to be, and I don't know if you can see that really well, but he's sitting right in one of the hexagons. This guy's pretty good. We lose a little bit of his tail, a little bit of his flame, but I think that works out pretty well. We chop his head off, but you've got some wiggle room here. I can maybe move this down a little bit more. No matter what, I'm going to end up chopping this guy's head off. So the other thing that probably I should have done before that is making sure that this PNG is locked, this artwork is locked. I'm going to reduce the size of it just a little bit so that it fits within complete cookies, or at least half cookies. So you can see there that this gives me half of a hexagon. Up here, I've got the same action going on with half of a hex. I like that. Now staying within that area, that level, I can actually move these over just a bit. All right. Working on placement, where the dinosaurs or the dragons go. Not as great. Maybe if I can move it here, but you get the idea. I'm going to look at placement just a little bit. Okay. We're going to stop there. Stop the fiddling. We've got this selected, and we need to go ahead and take this opacity all the way back up to its full extent. And I need to make this go to the bottom layer. I need the hexagons in front and the artwork all the way to the back. So with the selection tool here selected, I'm going to come up to my layer tool and choose to make this go all the way to the bottom. That looks great. The next step is to choose the shape builder tool, and it's going to let me use each one of those hexagons as a mask. Well, it would help if I selected them all first. So let's undo. That's either Command Z or Control Z. There we go. And I need to select everything. So everything's selected, all of the hexagons and the artwork. Now I can choose the Shape Builder tool and I get what I thought I should get. Do you see how some of these have that dark highlight, if you will? We need to correct that. And so up here in our tool controls, I'm going to choose the second one, which is deselect. And I'm going to click, and now it takes that initial selection out. Back to the select tool, and being able to add those shapes in, we can go in and pick up all of our shapes. All right, so we have all of those selected, and we're ready to use the Finish button in our tool controls bar. Takes a few seconds for it to work. And you might think, okay, that looks like it didn't do anything, but it did. So let me show you what it did. So I'm going to come over and choose the rectangle tool and just draw a rectangle in behind it. Let me choose a pretty dark color here. And again, using that selector tool, I'm going to send this to the back, and you can see all of our hexes. I can go in and select one and drag it away. Now at this point, these are still all in here as an SVG, and I can't copy and paste them into Swift Publisher. I have to export them as PNGs. I'm going to get rid of this blue background. I'm going to select all of my tiles, and I'm going to choose Export again over here in my docking area. And if you don't see it, remember you always just go to this little downturn arrow and choose Export from our list. This time we're going to do a batch export. Check out all of our tiles. So it looks like we've got maybe 20 items. So we're going to make 20 cookies. And we're going to use PNG, which is what we want. And I'm going to increase the DPI to 300. I'm going to change the prefix to Dragon Puzzle. And I'm going to choose where they go. So this tells me already that it's going into my folder called Dragon Hex Puzzle. You can always click on that folder and choose where you want it to go. You can see I've practiced this a little bit and already have a few in here, but that's where we want it to go, and we hit export. And all of our selections are being exported. I'm going to save this one more time, and we are through in Inkscape. Now we're ready to take our puzzle pieces and bring them into Swift Publisher, which is my choice for printing with my Eddie. Here are all of our puzzle pieces, and just to give you a little sneak preview, we're going to just select one and tap the space bar and check it out. You can see our line here showing us where the hexagon edge is, and I can just tap through the different images. So I'm using the down arrow key and to go through and check those out. So let me open up Swift Publisher. And by default, it goes to My Templates, and I already have a template set up for the Milton Tray. I'm going to hide the source panel. I don't use it very often. Really make that big so that you can see it. And the very first thing that I'm going to do is bring in that background hexagon. So I'm going to work in two different layers here within Swift Publisher, and that's one of the things that I love about doing this. So I'm going to go up to Insert and choose Image from File, and it should be on my desktop. There it is. My hexagon cookie cutter. I've done this a couple of times here. Open that up. And we now need to check the size of it to make sure it's proportioned and it's all the right size. Sometimes when I bring something in, even though it's clicked on, it doesn't show me the size. I have to click off and click back. I want to choose that fixed aspect ratio, and remember this was 3 inches wide, and it changes it to 2.6 inches tall, which is perfect. I'm going to center that. I'm going to come up again to the appearance window, and I'm going to crank down the opacity just so that I don't use a whole lot of ink when I print this out for print in place. The next step is to bring in one of our puzzle pieces. Now I've chosen to come back to the foreground, Insert, Image from File, and on the desktop there are my Dragon Hex puzzles, and here are all of my puzzle pieces. And I want to choose one that is a full hexagon first. That one's not. There we go. And I'm just going to drag and drop that right in. And this is a full hex cut at the sides and the top. So I can come back to fixed aspect ratio, and let's just make this 3 inches. Press the tab, and it's just about right. If I need to, I can move it just a little bit. Okay, I think that's pretty spot on. And I'm not going to worry about these parts that extend past our hexagon because they're going to just print outside of our cookie. Continue printing each full hexagon. Once you've got all those printed, move on to your halves and partial hexagons. I continued to use the full hexagon image with Swift for placement. I also printed out the full thing on my regular printer just to keep track of what I had printed and what I haven't. If you have any questions or need a bit of help, please reach out to me in the Eddie group, Instagram or TikTok. My social links are below. Please tag me if you post a picture of your cookie platter that you made using this tutorial.